Chapter 10. Rise. The British gangster and organised crime film genre has been one that has always been of keen interest, and none more than by me, but not in a million years did I ever think there was a reason or justification in making a film about my life. Not to mention one that would gain enough traction allowing it to be internationally recognised and then gain a cult film status and following. Further testament to the original script and film, it's one that is still watched and found amongst many household DVD collections. What I think allowed Rise of the Foot Soldier to stand out from other British cult classics, such as Guy Ritchie's films, is both ROTFS Parts 1 and 2 were not only, obviously, based on certain elements of organised crime and social topics, but also the raw realism of what went on in my own personal life. My natural progression and transition from hooligan, bouncer then, let's say enforcer, and depending on who had any level of involvement, also allowed my life to be, either less or more accurately, documented. But what many people don't know is how I ended up going from being embroiled in the underworld's muscle game to actually having a best-selling book and movie about my life, especially without ruthlessly grassing a whole bunch of active people up. That has remained a popular route to book sales for several people, but the happenings behind this step, albeit simple ones, are something that I think my fans and followers of my story deserve to hear about. I was contacted by Kate Cray to feature on Hard Bastards, and I figured why not, although at the time I didn't realise just how far-reaching it would eventually become. Throughout the filming process, I got on well with Kate, and when I heard that they were struggling to get more people to agree to be involved, I put forward, and helped her contact another 6 or 7 serious men that I thought might be up for it, most of whom ended up in the finished article. To me, Kate seemed to have a genuine intrigue and interest in the underworld and its inner workings, and I never stopped to think about this at the time, but possibly because she really liked my background, or in the spirit of returning a favour, her liking of my background or a blend of both, Kate organised for me to meet with John Blake of John Blake Publishing. I was a bit unsure at first, but she said she'd come with me, and we could just see what he had to say, no obligation. John was what we call a suit, an upper-middle-class guy who was well-educated, nicely spoken and had financial stability in his life, the sort who works from the comfort of a nice office and probably hasn't ever gotten their hands too dirty. And don't get me wrong, good luck to the suits of this world, and besides, John was a nice, decent guy who always stuck to his word where I was concerned, unlike some. Kate and I were sat in John's office, and he asked me a few questions that only someone with zero experience of real-life crime would ask. Then when he mentioned guns, I found myself with my hand in my pocket, gripping my flick knife as I listened to what he had to say. But anyway, Carlton, what's your weapon of choice out there on... Before he finished his sentence, I was across John's desk with my chiv to the side of his neck. The poor fella looked horrified for a few seconds, but Kate was absolutely rolling up with laughter. "I try to stick to blades where I can, John," I said as I folded the tool up, put it away and sat back down. The speed in which I'd opened the knife, made it over the desk and pressed it against his neck had even impressed me. I was rather chuffed with myself, in fact. Realising it was just a practical joke, perhaps a twisted one, I don't know, John also started laughing his head off. He'd loved it, and became so excited that he wanted to sign me up there and then. "We'll call your book The Knife Man, how about that, Carlton? It will be great." I advised John that if I were to agree to a book deal, it wouldn't be all about a knife-wielding nutcase who stabs people every day, and eventually the name Muscle was decided upon. Within weeks of his knife-wielding encounter, John sent me down to Sandwich in Kent to work with his ghostwriter Mike Fielder, who had organised a cottage for me to stay in so that I could spend time with him, going over the stories, and within approximately 7 months of that, Muscle was on the shelves. Many years after working with Mike, I learned that he'd passed away due to cancer, so I agreed with the publishers to continue sending half of the royalties from Muscle to Mike's family. And one thing that respectfully needs to be said is anyone who ever earned a tenner from my life story after that point in time owes credit to Kate Cray and John Blake, both of whom clearly believed in me, so thank you both. I could never have imagined in my wildest dreams, and I've had some crazy ones, that a book about me would sell so well. Even with the book sales increasing, I continued doing my thing and working security. It was whilst I was working the door at a restaurant in Ascot during the races with Sid that Terry Turbo walked in and came over to speak with me. He mentioned that he'd heard about my book and would love to get a copy, so I got him one from my car, wrote it out to him and signed it, which he was pleased with. As we chatted, he told me that he'd just finished up on a film set, further explaining that he wanted to get into the film business properly, and going on to say that perhaps I should make a film. I laughed it off in agreeance, but Terry seemed serious and said that he could make it happen. After I finished up work that night, I considered all the different avenues and possibilities, concluding with myself that, if this were to come to apparition, it could be a good opportunity for me to put a few good things out there about Tony and deservingly immortalize him and his memory in a good light. A couple of weeks had passed since the Ascot races and life was continuing, when Terry called me up with a film proposal, part of which was I would be paid $30,000 for the rights to my story. 30 grand is a lot of money even now, but back then it was even more of a big deal. Perhaps I could have haggled for a little more, as the saying goes, never accept the first offer, but I'm not a greedy man, and I figured that if I could earn that kind of money whilst people around me also benefited too, I'd be happy. As a prime example, with the film being made, I'd then help Terry get his wish of further acting work, not to mention certain people's roles in my life could be played out on screen. In my mind, this was a win, as there would surely be plenty of opportunities off of the back of a film for a good few people to gain success. Terry had organised some funding from investors to get the project started, as well as the Gilby brothers to write the script. Things were looking really good, and the thought of my story being told, my chance at getting to set the record straight and helping a good few people out in the meantime, was sounding better and better after each day passed. Plus, there was no doubt my friend had everything under control. Then a phone call came from Terry, asking me to attend a meeting with one of the owners from Carnaby, Andrew Loveday's dad, whose name I can't recall. The purpose of this meeting was basically for Loveday and Terry to renegotiate on the current deal and get me to agree to a different one. Now I know many of you may well be screaming at the page right now and questioning why I didn't hire a lawyer and have everything checked over, and their move was a massive red flag. But I trusted my friend of many years, Terry Turbo, to be looking out for and considering my best interests, as well as his own. So I took him and the people he'd brought to the table at face value, and I agreed to be paid just $10,000 for my story, plus 5% of all profits in a royalties deal. Given how I'd lived my life up to this point, I tried to think in a sensible, selfless way about the situation, the long-term benefits for a lot of people, plus there's no denying a small trickle of steady income is a good idea in anyone's books, especially those with young children. With all of that in mind, and not wanting to hold anyone else back from earning a living, I signed the new deal, not realising at the time that it would only really benefit those that had put it together. Non-fiction films are, more often than not, made about dead people. I don't know why, but it's true, isn't it? So, to stand on a film set where people are recreating your life is, to say the least, very weird. I'd even go as far as to say that I found it very surreal and at times overwhelming. I think I played about 4 cameo roles in the film. I got mates involved in various extras scenes, playing bouncers, hooligans, ravers and all sorts. I was on set almost every day of filming. I wanted to be on hand to consult, making sure things were going to come across in the right way, and even though the environment was new to me, I thoroughly enjoyed the experience. Of course, events in films often do get enhanced or dramatised for theatrical purposes, and certain parts of the plot are often told in a way so as not to incriminate people that are still alive. Plus, I was keen for that film to be made in such a way that it was as close to the real thing as possible. After all, it was about my life and involved real people. Things happened that affected the lives of actual human beings, not cartoon characters. Every happening and storyline had to be right, and those involved had to be done justice. It's very easy for a no-mark, cheap import, who lived in Essex for a while, to sit in his favourite trucker cafe before going off to shovel gravel for the day, saying, "Carlton made all that nonsense up about the Turks." I very much doubt he'd have the balls to say that to the family of my doorman who topped himself after they all got tortured. All that needs to be said about that gravel-shifting slob is, any level of criticism is easy to give, as it's one that risks little in terms of emotional or personal experience. I was actually affected by not only the loss, but the taking of people's lives. I sought peace and a way to move on in life, unlike him, who only consistently seeks attention and a means of profiting from it all. Once the film was finished, a private showing was arranged at a cinema in Soho for a select 20 or so people who were all close to and involved with the film. This was the point where the fun and madness of being on set ended, and the actual reality of what had been achieved really hit home for me. The scenario of me being lost for words is, more or less rare as rocking horse shit, but to watch those events from my life play out on a cinema screen left me speechless for the most part. Everyone that knows me will tell you that I'm bang into films myself, and on a personal level it has always been a hobby of mine, but to be a part of one was just next level. Next up, Sky got in contact, wanting to film me and Anne going to the movie premiere for the show Gangsters' Wives. They even paid for us to stay in the ultra-luxurious Savoy Hotel so that they could film us getting ready in the lead-up to the red carpet event. Travelling to and arriving at the Odeon Leicester Square by stretch limo and featuring on a Sky TV series was an additional extra to the premiere for me, but a massive free advertising boost for the greedy and ungrateful filmmakers. We've all seen movie premieres on the news, but when I stepped out of the limo onto the red carpet where photographers were snapping away, lights were flashing and reporters were shouting, "Any comment, Carlton?" It almost felt as though I was in someone else's body. It was as much as strange as it was a surreal experience. The premiere's after-party was held at Café de Paris, which was full of celebs, and everyone had a great time. All those involved in the making of the film were buzzing after finally watching it in its entirety. There were so many recognisable faces from TV and film that night, from Steve McFadden, Phil Mitchell in EastEnders, to Jeremy Kyle, but my personal favourite and by far the most memorable was Barbara Windsor. May she rest in peace. We had a great chat that evening. This book gives me a good platform to thank the most important people of all who were involved in the film's widespread success, not just in the UK and USA, but several other countries too, and those people are the fans. All the people who ever bought a copy of Muscle, went to the cinema to watch ROTF 1 or 2, maybe bought the DVD and have now bought this book. I thank you for your support, and I for one know that it wouldn't be possible without you. My gratitude to the fans is one of the very reasons that any time I've ever seen a copy of Muscle on the shelf in Waterstones, I've found the manager, shown them my ID, and signed all the copies in the store. About 2 years after the release of ROTF 1, complete strangers started to try to contact me, stating that they had never received a penny back from their investment into the film, and groups started to appear on social media where investors who'd had their fingers burned could share information. It bothered me because not only were these regular, trusting, everyday working-class people, but people who felt they'd been taken advantage of. The phrase, "running off with an old lady's life savings," comes to mind. Things started to look pretty bleak in terms of anyone ever getting paid, myself included. It's always concerned me how much my name is, of course, associated with that film, whilst at the same time, there are people out there who lost their savings through it, something which doesn't sit right with me at all, but I had no involvement in the business side of things. I was unwittingly being used as a springboard by several people. Given that so many people, myself and Ricci included, had been shortchanged from ROTF 1, we decided to make a second instalment ourselves and name it Reign of the General. However, that project ended up on the wrong end of a court case, and Carnaby finished up with the rights to complete and release the film, which you may now know as Rise of the Foot Soldier 2. When I learnt that a third instalment of ROTF was being made, I wondered where they were going to get another storyline from, so I posed the question to Andrew, whose written reply really was amazing to me. They were basing the plot on newspaper cuttings and hearsay. How can you make a film based on a man's autobiography, then start to release a string of fictional films under the very same name? In my opinion, it's a betrayal and an utter travesty, not only what they have done to the name ROTF, but also to the dead men who they are making up lies about, and as many have said, would they have dared to do so if they were still alive? From then on, no matter how much money I was offered to endorse the new fictional direction of these films, it simply wasn't going to happen with me. Because as I said already, this is people's families, lives, reputations, memories and honour that we're trading in here, not just dollars and DVDs, and I have a higher moral standing than to be a part of something I believe to be morally wrong. As I've also previously said on Twitter, these actions, in my opinion, are very deceptive and purposefully carried out in such a way as to allow fans of my true story to believe that ROTF 3, 4 and so on are a continuation, or that I am in some way the source of information behind the storylines, but I would never be involved in such trickery. So, if you take away one thing from reading this chapter, please try to remember that I'm not Carlton Rise of the Foot Soldier Leech anymore, because if there was anything more I could do to distance myself from the association with that name, I'd do it in a heartbeat, due to what has been done using that name. Largely thanks to the actors and film crew, ROTF1 remains a British cult classic, and whilst it is a great shame how certain parties have behaved for a quick quid and an attempt at being famous, a great amount of positivity has also come out of ROTF. For example, at my shows and via my personal Twitter account, I've been able to help raise both money and awareness for charities and causes, but more about these things later. There have been many people I've considered to be celebrities that have wanted to speak to me. I was a guest at City Pavilion in Romford one evening, where Iron Mike Tyson was giving a talk. You can imagine my surprise when someone came to my table and asked if I would go out the back to meet Mike and have a chat, can't you? One of the greatest boxers of all time and a proper gentleman. He told me he'd seen the film and wanted to meet me. That was an honour and a pleasure. My wish and hope was for my story to be captured and shown in ROTF1, of course. That included the loss of my best friend Tony, but more so to include and show the main parts of who and what made me and my life as a whole, my childhood, involvement and days at West Ham and the Muscle Game. What the film is talked and referred to most is the Rettendon murders. Is it fair to ask that this event was the only part of my life that intrigued the filmmakers, and one they could only understand and see as a marketable product? There is no closing that would be befitting or give my total honest view on the whole series of ROTFs, but it's worth remembering, there can only be the original story, and that's one that gives credibility to the title itself. Surely, Rise of the Foot Soldier would then have one included. As a man, I've always held my head high. I've never had to swerve or worry about bumping into someone. Having a film made about my life is truly humbling and a testament to how far I have come since my childhood and running amok as a teenager whilst supporting the Claret and Blue. There have been many chapters to my life, and if I were to base them all over a 7-day week, the Rettendon murders took up one short lunch break of my life, and ROTF is just one of those chapters.